London, Carlton Gardens, November 1953. An elegant townhouse between the Mall and Pall Mall. Chandeliers, sweeping staircases, the kind of building where empires make decisions. Inside, 12 men sit around a mahogany table. CIA, MI6, the best technical minds Western intelligence can assemble. They're planning something audacious, something impossible. A tunnel, 1,500 feet, straight under the Iron Curtain, into Soviet-occupied East Berlin, to tap 3 cable lines carrying Moscow's most sensitive communications. One man takes meticulous notes. George Blake, MI6 Section Y, hero, former prisoner of war, trusted officer. He sketches the cable routes, the tunnel trajectory, the tap location, everything. That evening, he hands his notes to a Soviet handler. The KGB knows. Before the first shovel hits dirt, before construction begins, before a single American engineer arrives in Berlin, they know everything. And they let it happen anyway. Subscribe before this operation goes dark. We're following the trail they tried to bury. October 29, 1948. Western Signals Intelligence calls it Black Friday, the day the Soviets went silent. Every cryptographic system changed overnight. Military communications shifted from radio to buried landlines. American listening posts from Alaska to Turkey heard nothing but static. The taps went dry. The intercepts stopped. Soviet moles had done their work. William Weisband at NSA, Kim Philby at MI6. They'd warned Moscow that Western codebreakers were reading their traffic. Moscow responded with total communications blackout. By 1951, Frank Rowlett was desperate. Rowlett, the legendary cryptanalyst who broke Japan's purple cipher before Pearl Harbor, the man who helped America see the attack coming. Now he couldn't see anything coming from the Soviet Union. He shared drinks with Bill Harvey, CIA officer, former FBI agent, gun-carrying, martini-drinking, hard-charging intelligence operative, the man who would later become known as America's James Bond. The conversation was blunt. American intelligence was flying blind. Soviet troop movements in East Germany unknown. Military capabilities uncertain. Nuclear intentions invisible. They needed access, physical access, to Soviet communications. The British had an idea. Since 1949, MI6 had been running Operation Silver in Vienna. Short tunnels dug from a Harris Tweed clothing shop, tapping Soviet cables. The store became so successful as a business, it actually interfered with intelligence work. The Vienna operation proved something crucial. Soviet cables could be tapped, without detection, without counterintelligence discovery. The question became, where else? Reinhard Gehlen provided the answer. Head of West German intelligence, former Wehrmacht general. The organization, his network, had sources everywhere, including inside the East German Postal Service. The source reported something remarkable. A telephone junction near the American sector border in Berlin. 3 Soviet trunk lines, converging underground, less than 2 meters deep. Rudow in West Berlin, Alt-Glienicke in East Berlin. The water table unusually low, 32 feet down instead of the normal 16. Perfect conditions, perfect location, perfect opportunity. The cables carried communications between Moscow and Soviet headquarters at Zossen-Winsdorf, between Red Army command posts, between GRU intelligence stations across Eastern Europe. Everything Western intelligence needed to hear. All they had to do was dig 1,500 feet under the Iron Curtain without Soviet detection, through occupied territory where Soviet and East German patrols operated constantly. Simple. Late 1953, Carlton Gardens, London. The planning meetings began. Joint CIA MI6. The American delegation led by Bill Harvey, now CIA Berlin Station Chief. Frank Rowlett serving as cryptological advisor to Director Alan Dulles. The British brought their A-team, George Young, MI6 Director of Requirements, Peter Lunn, MI6 Berlin Station Chief, former Olympic alpine skier, veteran of the Vienna tunnel operations. Lunn's expertise was critical. He'd pioneered the Vienna tunnels, knew the engineering challenges, the technical requirements, the operational security protocols. The operation received 2 code names, PB jointly, P for Peter, B for Bill. Americans called it Operation Gold. British called it Operation Stopwatch. Alan Dulles approved in January 1954. One critical instruction: as little as possible be reduced to writing. The West German government was deliberately excluded. Their intelligence service too penetrated. Too many Soviet moles. The irony would become apparent later. The Americans worried about German security, while a Soviet mole sat in their own planning meetings, taking notes. George Blake attended every session, listened to every briefing, recorded every detail. Blake had been captured during the Korean War in 1950, imprisoned for 3 years. During captivity, the KGB recruited him, not through torture, not through blackmail, through ideology. Blake returned to Britain in 1953, celebrated as a hero, reassigned to Section Y, MI6's technical operations arm, the perfect position for a Soviet penetration agent. After the February 1954 meeting, Blake drew a small sketch: cable routes, tunnel trajectory, tap location. He passed it to his KGB handler, Sergei Kondrashev. The Soviets knew, before construction, before engineering, before the first surveyor examined the site. The KGB made a calculation. George Blake was worth more than protecting communications. His position inside British intelligence was irreplaceable. Any action against the tunnel would immediately expose the handful of people who knew about it. So they decided, let the tunnel operate. Let American and British engineers believe they've achieved the impossible. Protect the mole. The decision came from the top, compartmentalized absolutely. The KGB did not inform the GRU, did not inform Red Army commanders, did not inform the East Germans or Stasi, did not inform the Soviet officials whose conversations would be intercepted, which meant one remarkable thing: the intelligence flowing through those cables would be genuine. September 2nd, 1954, Rudow, West Berlin. Construction began with a cover story. The US Air Force announced plans for a new radar installation, electronic intelligence collection facility, legitimate cover for unusual construction activity, a warehouse compound, city block size, chain link fence, radar antennas on the roof, everything appearing normal from the outside. Inside, Army Corps of Engineers prepared for something extraordinary. Lieutenant Colonel Leslie M. Gross led the engineering team. Captain Robert G. Williamson recruited the crews: welders, sheet metal workers, engineers, soldiers who could keep secrets. A West Berlin contractor built the warehouse, told it needed an unusually deep basement, 23 feet. The contractor assumed it was for improved storage design, asked no questions, built to specifications. That basement served a hidden purpose: storage for 3,100 tons of excavated soil, earth that couldn't leave the site without raising suspicion. The tunnel specifications pushed 1950s engineering to its limits. Length, 1,476 feet, longer than the Empire State Building is tall. Diameter, 6 feet, just enough room for a man to work. Depth, 20 feet underground. Construction, 1,700 cast iron lining plates, 125 tons of steel, 1,000 cubic yards of grout. The engineering team used a technique called shield driving, a protective steel cylinder pushed forward by hydraulic jacks. Workers excavated soil from inside the shield, bolted 5 curved plates together to form steel rings 6 feet in diameter. A wooden railway track guided rubber-wheeled vehicles hauling debris back to the warehouse basement. The first crisis came within weeks. Workers broke through into an undocumented pre-World War I cesspool. Sewage flooded the tunnel. Pumps worked around the clock. The engineering schedule fell behind. The second crisis came with winter. The first snowfall revealed a straight line of melted snow, pointing from the warehouse toward East Berlin like an arrow. The tunnel's heat signature visible from above. Engineers from London flew in that same day. Air conditioning installed immediately. Temperature controlled. The line disappeared. The tunnel advanced, 6 feet per day on average, through sand, through clay, through water-saturated soil. One creative solution revealed American ingenuity. Engineers needed a reference point in East Berlin for precise surveying. They organized a baseball game. Objective: knock balls into Soviet territory, East German. Guards kept frustratingly returning the balls, until finally one stayed in the East Zone. Reference point established. By February 25, 1955, the tunnel reached Soviet territory, 1,500 feet of underground passage, invisible from above, undetected by Soviet counterintelligence. Now came the delicate part, the tap. Peter Lunn supervised the final phase personally. British expertise, honed in Vienna, applied to Berlin. The tunnel reached a point directly beneath Schönefelder Chaussee, a busy highway. Soviet tanks passed overhead regularly. East German military convoys, civilian traffic. 18 inches above the tunnel ceiling, 3 Soviet cables carrying 172 circuits, pressurized with nitrogen. Any breach would alert technicians immediately. The team drove a vertical shaft upward, the tap chamber, just large enough for 2 men to work. British Post Office specialists from Dollis Hill Research Station performed the operation. John Wyke led the team. MI6 veteran, Vienna tunnel expert. Blake Reimer joined him, Scottish cable jointer, described as the best Britain had. Les Sparks and Arthur Looms completed the crew. They used an improvised device called the mole for vertical shaft work. Slow, precise, silent. A heavy steel door separated the tap chamber from the main tunnel. Torch-proof. Bill Harvey reportedly painted a sign on it. In German and Russian, entry is forbidden by the commanding general. The actual entrance bore another Harvey touch. You are now entering the American sector. The first cable was tapped May 11, 1955, the second on May 21st, the third on August 2nd. With all taps operational, 600 tape recorders began capturing communications continuously, 24 hours per day. A microphone placed in the tap chamber allowed security monitoring. Operators could hear everything above: tank treads on pavement, boots on the street, conversations in German and Russian. The tunnel was live. Moscow's secrets now flowed to Washington and London, but Moscow already knew. For 11 months and 11 days, Operation Gold produced intelligence Western commanders called invaluable. The statistics tell one story: 50,000 six-hour reels of magnetic tape, 443,000 fully transcribed conversations, 368,000 Soviet, 75,000 East German, 40,000 hours of telephone conversations, 6 million hours of teletype traffic, 1,750 intelligence reports produced. At peak capacity, 500 connections monitored simultaneously. Processing this mountain required 2 dedicated centers. In London, 317 Russian émigrés and German linguists worked near Regent's Park, transcribing voice recordings, 8-hour shifts around the clock. In Washington, 350 employees worked at the hosiery mill, temporary World War II buildings along the reflecting pool, processing teleprinter signals forwarded to Frank Rowlett's Staff D. The work continued until September 30th, 1958, more than 2 years after the tunnel's discovery. The backlog, that massive. Corporal Eugene Kovalenko worked inside the tunnel as a 22-year-old Army linguist. He later recalled spending 16 hours per day, 7 days per week, listening to freshly recorded tapes, material that couldn't wait for processing elsewhere. A March 1956 Army intelligence assessment declared Regal, the NSA codename for the product, our best source of early warning of Soviet attack. The intelligence value proved extraordinary. Soviet nuclear delivery capability in East Germany, developing faster than estimated. Soviet bomber strength in Poland, doubled from previous assessments. Approximately 100 Soviet Air Force installations identified in the USSR, East Germany, and Poland, previously unknown or not located for years. Order of battle for Soviet ground forces, units not previously identified, locations confirmed. Several hundred Soviet intelligence personalities identified in East Germany and Moscow. Names, ranks, assignments, operational patterns, workers on Soviet atomic energy projects identified. Uranium shipment data from Wismuth mining operations, critical for understanding Soviet nuclear program expansion. Early warning of Soviet plans to establish an East German army. Timeline, equipment, training protocols. But the greatest value wasn't in specific facts, it was in understanding. The wiring diagram of how the Soviet system worked, who talked to whom, who reported to whom. The relationships between organizations invisible from single-source intelligence. CIA officers called it unprecedented insight. The ability to see inside Soviet military command structure, to understand decision-making processes, to identify friction points and bureaucratic conflicts. Western military planners gained strategic reassurance. The intercepts revealed no Soviet plans for invading Western Europe, no immediate war preparations, no mobilization orders. The intelligence allowed recalibration, force deployments, contingency planning, diplomatic positioning. One CIA officer summarized it simply: "We learned how they think, and through it all, the Soviets knew. Let genuine intelligence flow." Protecting George Blake, April 1956. Heavy spring rains flooded Berlin. Telephone cables throughout the city sustained water damage. The Soviets had their cover story. On the evening of April 20th, American operators messaged headquarters. All precautions taken, including primary one of crossing fingers. Shortly after midnight on April 22nd, personnel using night vision equipment detected activity above. 40 to 50 Soviet soldiers, digging at 3 to 5 foot intervals along the cable route. The microphone in the tap chamber transmitted everything. 200 hours. Top of tap chamber discovered. 210 hours. Russian speech. Workers initially thought they'd found a manhole covering a repeater point. 320 hours. A German remarked the chamber might be connected with sewage work. 11:45 hours. A German voice exclaimed, "The box is an entry to a shaft." 15:15 hours. Tap wires cut. 15:50 hours. Microphone went dead. Given ample warning, American personnel retreated behind the steel door, removed sensitive equipment, withdrew to the warehouse. The Soviets couldn't open the door. Too heavy, too well secured. They dug through an adjacent wall instead, reached the pre-amplification chamber, found sophisticated British-built equipment, clearly labeled, worth millions of dollars. On April 26, 1956, the Soviets held their first international press conference in 11 years of occupation. Timing calculated perfectly. Khrushchev was visiting Britain, specifically the day before a state banquet with Queen Elizabeth II at Windsor Castle. 50,000 East Germans were bussed through the tunnel to witness Western treachery, to see American imperialism exposed. The propaganda campaign anticipated outrage, condemnation, international embarrassment for the United States. Instead, the opposite occurred. World media marveled at the audacity, the technical brilliance, the sheer boldness of the operation. The CIA's internal history noted, worldwide reaction was outstandingly favorable in terms of enhancement of U.S. prestige. America, almost universally regarded as a stumbling neophyte in espionage matters, had pulled off a coup against the Soviet Union, the acknowledged master of such operations. The tunnel became legend, Harvey's hole, the operation that worked despite impossible odds. What nobody knew yet, it had worked despite Soviet knowledge from day one. Bill Harvey, born 1915 in Cleveland, law degree from Indiana, FBI agent from 1940, CIA officer from 1947. Colleagues called him America's James Bond. But Harvey looked nothing like a movie spy. Overweight, disheveled, the unseemly bulge of a shoulder holster under his too-tight jacket. He carried 2 pistols, always, sometimes 3, drank more alcohol than any other person in the U.S. government, according to journalist David Martin. Yet nobody ever saw him drunk. Harvey first made his mark identifying Kim Philby as a Soviet mole after getting into a fistfight with Guy Burgess at a party when Burgess drew a lewd cartoon of Harvey's wife. He founded Staff D, the CIA's Electronic Surveillance Operations Division, technical intelligence, physical penetrations, daring operations. George Blake mistook him for a Texan during their first meeting at Carlton Gardens. The Wild West approach to intelligence, the gun-carrying swagger, the direct manner. CIA officer John Whitton called Harvey a hard-boiled, unsubtle, ruthless guy who was, in my opinion, a very dangerous man. Tom Parrott noted Harvey disliked and resented the Ivy Leaguers in the CIA. Yet another colleague observed he wanted to be part of the establishment. Harvey drank vodka martinis, constantly, worked grueling hours, demanded perfection from subordinates, led from the front on dangerous operations. The tunnel became his masterpiece, his legacy, the operation that proved American intelligence could match Soviet capabilities. Allen Dulles awarded Harvey the Distinguished Intelligence Medal in a private ceremony, even honors Dulles believed should be kept secret. Harvey continued CIA operations through the 1960s, including anti-Castro programs, Cuban operations, assassination planning that never materialized. He died of a heart attack in 1976, age 60. The martinis and stress finally caught up, but the tunnel remained, his monument, Harvey's hole, the impossible operation that succeeded. George Blake sat through the London meetings, took meticulous notes, sketched cable routes, handed everything to the KGB. His betrayal wasn't discovered until 1961, 5 years after the tunnel's exposure, 6 years after he'd compromised the operation. Polish defector Michał Goleniewski provided the breakthrough, information pointing to a mole in MI6. Blake was recalled from Lebanon, where he was studying Arabic, arrested upon arrival in London, half a day's questioning, then voluntary confession. Blake was offended by suggestions he'd been blackmailed or tortured into cooperation. "No, nobody tortured me. No. Nobody blackmailed me. I myself approached the Soviets and offered my service to them of my own accord." His trial at the Old Bailey was held in camera, closed session, no public disclosure of specific betrayals. Lord Chief Justice Parker sentenced him to 42 years, the longest non-life sentence in British history, reportedly 1 year for each agent killed, though likely apocryphal. Prime Minister Harold Macmillan noted, "The LCJ has passed a savage sentence, 42 years. Blake served 5 years at Wormwood Scrubs Prison. Then on October 22, 1966, he escaped. Irish petty criminal Sean Bourke helped. Peace activists Michael Randall and Pat Pottle assisted. While guards and inmates watched the weekly film, Blake broke a window, slid down a porch roof, climbed a rope ladder made of knitting needles thrown over the 20-foot wall. He broke his wrist and sprained his ankle in the jump. Bourke crashed the getaway car within a block, but they reached the safe house. 2 months later, Randall drove Blake to East Germany, hidden beneath the seats of a camper van. Randall's wife and 2 young children in the vehicle never told their passenger's identity. Blake arrived in Moscow December 17, 1966, welcomed as a hero, made a KGB colonel, awarded the Order of Lenin, the Order of the Red Banner. Later, in 2007, the Order of Friendship from Vladimir Putin. Blake lived in Moscow 54 years, married a Russian woman, raised a family, worked as an instructor for Soviet intelligence. He wrote a memoir, No Other Choice, published 1990, self-justifying, ideological, claiming he acted from principle, not payment. His most famous statement captures his worldview. "To betray, you first have to belong. I never belonged." Blake died in Moscow December 26, 2020, age 98. Putin sent a massive wreath of red roses to his funeral at Troyekurovskoye Cemetery's Alley of Heroes. SVR director Sergei Narishkin eulogized, "He chose the path of a decisive and uncompromising fight for the highest humanistic values, for a just and free world. The irony was complete. The man who betrayed the tunnel before it began outlived everyone who built it. Here lies Operation Gold's strangest chapter, the supreme paradox of Cold War espionage. The KGB knew, let the tunnel operate. For 11 months, protecting George Blake cost more than protecting communications. But that decision created an unexpected outcome. The intelligence was genuine. The Soviets couldn't warn everyone without exposing Blake. So GRU communications continued unguarded. Red Army conversations remained candid. Soviet officials spoke freely. CIA analysts later conducted extensive reviews, searching for disinformation, for fed intelligence, for deliberately misleading conversations. They found none. The assessment concluded there were no known attempts to feed disinformation. Even Markus Wolf, legendary East German spymaster, called claims of disinformation a myth. He lauded the tunnel as an intelligence man's dream. Blake himself later stated that 99% of the information gleaned from the taps was authentic. The KGB's own high-level communications used separate overhead cables, impossible to tap without immediate detection. So genuinely sensitive Soviet intelligence operations remained protected. Everything else flowed unguarded through the tapped lines, which meant Operation Gold achieved its intelligence objectives, despite Soviet foreknowledge. Because of Soviet compartmentalization, through protecting their most valuable asset, Western intelligence gained unprecedented insight into Soviet operations. Moscow protected George Blake. Both sides achieved their primary objectives. German historian Bernd von Koska observed, in the strange accounting of the Cold War, each side could say they won. Portions of the tunnel survive today. The eastern section was excavated in 1956, segments recently rediscovered in a forest 150 kilometers from Berlin. The western section was excavated in 1997, now resides at the Allied Museum in Berlin. Visitors can walk through a reconstructed section, see the engineering marvel, understand the audacity. The operation's cost, originally estimated at $50,000, final cost, $6.5 million. Equivalent to 2 Lockheed U-2 spy planes. But the intelligence value exceeded monetary calculation. CIA Director Alan Dulles called it one of the most valuable and daring projects ever undertaken. The operation proved American technical capabilities, matched Soviet engineering prowess, demonstrated that Western intelligence could conduct sophisticated physical operations in denied territory. The tunnel's discovery, paradoxically, enhanced American prestige. World media celebrated the audacity, the technical brilliance, the sheer boldness of attempting the impossible. For the intelligence community, Operation Gold became a case study in technical operations, in compartmentalization, in the strange paradoxes of espionage. The Blake betrayal reinforced British security concerns, coming after the Cambridge 5 defections, after Philby's exposure, another devastating penetration of MI6. MI6 director Dick White later claimed Blake did more damage than Philby. His position inside technical operations, his access to joint CIA-MI6 planning, his ability to compromise ongoing operations before they began. The tunnel led to improved vetting procedures, enhanced security protocols, stricter compartmentalization of sensitive operations. But it also proved something remarkable. American and British engineers could conceive the impossible, plan the audacious, execute the technically brilliant. 1,500 feet under the Iron Curtain, tapping Soviet communications, operating undetected for 11 months, extracting 443,000 conversations. George Blake could betray the operation before it began. The KGB could know every detail. Soviet leadership could make the strategic decision to let it continue. And still, Operation Gold succeeded, delivered intelligence that shaped Western strategy, provided insights that influenced Cold War policy, demonstrated capabilities that enhanced American prestige. The game ended, not with a bullet, but with a Soviet press conference and a knitting needle rope ladder. Truth mattered then. It matters now. London, Carlton Gardens, November 1953. 12 men planned the impossible. One betrayed it immediately. The Soviets knew everything and let it happen anyway. For 11 months, 600 tape recorders captured Moscow's secrets, 443,000 conversations, 6 million hours of teletype traffic, intelligence that shaped the Cold War. Bill Harvey built his masterpiece, 1,500 feet under the Iron Curtain, Harvey's Hole, the tunnel that worked despite Soviet knowledge. George Blake took notes and handed them to the KGB, 42 years in prison, then escaped to Moscow, where he died at 98, decorated as a hero. The supreme paradox, both sides won. Western intelligence gained unprecedented insight. Moscow protected their most valuable mole. Each achieved their primary objective. The tunnel was discovered April 22, 1953. 56, but processing continued until September 1958. 2 years of backlog, 2 years of Soviet secrets analyzed and exploited. The operation cost $6.5 million, generated 1,750 intelligence reports, identified hundreds of Soviet intelligence personnel, revealed military capabilities and deployment patterns. Most importantly, it demonstrated something the world needed to see. American intelligence could match Soviet sophistication, could execute technically brilliant operations, could dare the impossible and succeed. Portions of the tunnel exist today at the Allied Museum in Berlin, a monument to audacity, to technical brilliance, to the strange paradoxes of Cold War espionage. The engineers who dug it are gone. Bill Harvey died in 1976. George Blake outlived them all. Peter Lunn passed in 2002. The tunnel remains, Harvey's hole, the operation that the Soviets knew about but couldn't stop, because protecting one British traitor mattered more than protecting 3 Soviet cable lines. The lesson endures. In intelligence work, sometimes the greatest success comes not from perfect security but from enemy calculations, not from operational secrecy but from strategic value. Operation Gold succeeded because George Blake was too valuable to protect against, because the KGB made a choice: lose communications intelligence or lose their mole inside MI6. They chose to lose the communications. We gained the intelligence, and the world learned what American technical operations could achieve. Justice was served, but the war never ended. Subscribe for the stories they buried.